So let me walk you through the process, and then I'll hand it over to Mayor Morrow. I have created a list of the ideas, and each idea is numbered. So I think we have 54 total. Whoever worked on each of the strategic goal areas will just go to the board. If you can't remember which one you worked on, here's a list right here of which one of the strategic goal areas you'll be working with. The 4 are around the room. So what you will do is you will read on your key area all the numbers, and you will give them a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4. A 1 is essential, a 2 is desirable, a 3 is acceptable, and a 4 is deferrable. And there's a little thought starter to give you an idea of what those 4 might mean. So all you have to do is take the number. Let's say you have number 22. You just take number 22 and you put it on your flip chart as to whether or not it's a 1, 2, 3, or 4. Therefore, I'll be able to gather them all, and you won't have to do any writing except for a number. Does that all make sense? All right, so I'm going to turn this over to Mayor Morrow. I know you have a few opening remarks you'd like to make, and then we'll proceed.
Very good. Well, we welcome everybody this evening. Marilyn, we thank you for your time again and assistance in facilitating this session. I do want to note that, unless Terry corrects me, the city manager is participating remotely via Zoom. She has not joined yet. She has not joined yet. Do you want to text her just to confirm that she's all right and that she's not having any technical difficulties? Suffice it to say, the city manager will be with us momentarily via Zoom. Marilyn, I think, as you know, and everyone else, her wife gave birth on Saturday, and we wish her and Alicia and the family very well. I look forward to the discussion this evening and zeroing in on a set of goals for the next fiscal year, which will begin July 1. I'm going to say this at this time because I don't know if there's a more appropriate time to say it, but I think it directly correlates with what I said at our first session about kind of zeroing in on those core services and making sure that that is the priority for the next 18 months and that we move expeditiously to deliver on those services when we can. I've been doing a lot of reflecting of late, and what I'm about to say the genesis of my comments relates back to a conversation I had with the police chief probably 6 months ago. And as you reflect on this organization in its totality, I think that the city of Saline does a lot of things really well. I think this really is an exceptional place and an exceptional community. And when you look at the city as a whole, there's much more that is good here than that. But I think one of the deficiencies that I think is endemic in the organization, and I don't think it's unusual for a small town, is a lack of a sense of urgency. I came from an environment in the legislature where everything was on fire, everything was an emergency, and of course we realize that that's also not the right perspective. That is mostly horseshit and people just not having a sense of perspective or any sense of proportion. But I think there are times in this organization where we do not move as aggressively or expeditiously to solve problems as perhaps we should. And I note that because Saline is is experiencing some transition. This is no longer what I would define as a quote-unquote small town. This is now a city of nearly 10,000 residents, a lot of heavy industry, a diverse business community, and an increasingly diverse constituency. And so I think a sense of urgency, I think prioritizing those core municipal services and moving expeditiously to address citizen complaints and solve problems is really critical. And so I articulate all that because I'm trying to help orchestrate a bit of a cultural change in the way we think and the way we conduct business in the city of Saline. So I didn't mean to put the chief on the spot. Jared, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add to that conversation. I'd be happy to yield the floor since I invoked your name.
Yeah, that's okay. I think it was an important discussion we had. It's, again, not everything can be an emergency. How do we prioritize, especially getting back to our
get off my soapbox, and I just wanted to mention that because it's been on my mind, and I think it's, again, important for this organization to look to sort of change the attitude, the culture, the perspective, especially when dealing with problems and understanding where we're at today in 2021.
So anything else we need to discuss before we move to these 4 strategic key areas? I will remind you that we had citizen survey results. We had some citizens last week. We had lots of conversation about these key areas, but that doesn't mean that the ideas within them are exhausted. So if your team says, there's one here that's missing and it ought to be done immediately, especially if it's one of those number ones, make sure that you add it to the list, and then there are markers. You can just, with a marker, add it to your list. Are there any questions about what we're going to be doing next? So I will check in with you, but I would imagine this may take you 15 minutes or so, but I'll check in to make sure that you're moving along and that everyone isn't completely finished and now talking about the weather. Yes.
The list up there,
I
with
w-
the numbers on it?
Yes.
for the presentation?
Yes, I will bring them to each of the flip charts.
So they're to then gather with the individuals that they worked with when we had the public open house, so we can have them.
Yes, and there is a list of who they are right up here if you have forgotten. All right, and meanwhile, I will walk around to the flip charts with the information that you need.
I think maybe Jan and Terry's is a little light, so why don't you jump in on that one? Which one are you at, Jack? Oh, because you weren't here. Why don't you jump in with these two then? They those are the light ones. Ted, you can jump wherever you want, my friend.
There's numbers on it.
No, I mean priority.
We're putting the stickers on number 1. Staff recruitment, you were on the That's essential. I'll look it out. I was already got all the answers.
Let me check with you then. And then
Okay, so then number 2
was on Maplewood, Maplewood
is
Now we see it's regional essential desirable acceptable or yeah, just on page 4. Those were bullets in the original essential.
So, yeah, I put Jack first, so I threw him in this group. Here. I'll be out.
One's underneath here, just in case he's coming unattached from. 48-1, 49-1.
Yeah, if there are any, it's like, yeah, probably. Start going down the solar panels.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Did you get the paperwork over there?
Yeah, it's
Well, there might not be any left, okay.
Basically, last meeting, I think it's like incorporating solar into these city projects.
oh, I see.
Money, but, oh no, that's the way we're trending.
Yeah, because it's, so the definition of acceptable is, worthwhile, but not absolutely required, it should be deferred to that.
So that would probably be it's acceptable. Seems like a good idea, but we're gonna go out of our way to really do it.
Go picture.
Sorry.
That's something I'm just ready for the big gas stations to jump on board. I'm ready for like speed order to be like, good, if we're going about now.
Surprised they haven't doing it yet.
Dude, I'm very surprised. I think they're waiting on it to become like a uniform charger instead of banking up. Like a Chevy Volt having a Tesla.
Well, you know what, I use 220.
Yeah, it really is like.
I have to almost say that.
Let's say 51 units.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, no, good, good. 50. That's what I was thinking. Varied forms of communication.
four here? That's what I was thinking.
Are they talking about a compost center, recycling center?
I think it's kind of.
More recycling?
Described it being about like a true compost center.
Our own here in town?
Like that the city would be kind of run, it their leaves, they get most there, then people can fucking walk and go.
Yeah, supposedly they just don't let it run like that. That's becoming a city function.
Well, but that's,
That's something the city currently used to do, it isn't, it
planning and development, which planning for your future and your tax base and everything.
Can't remember.
So I've heard from someone, like, yeah, probably just got talked about, the board was talking about it, and that's it.
Well, I think we made arrangements to buy them, but I don't think we never were gonna
the city was gonna purchase them, we could get like.
It is, but all is recruiting and retention. Is retention is important and it's still needed. So you can talk to them together. Imagine if you want to spend more money on the team,
What was the discussion surrounding that?
I think you could almost put that under code. Well, I know it is. Everybody's on edge and everything sets them off. That was kind of the issue. Because of COVID, we're all more on edge, anxiety.
Oh. Maybe put a version on too.
Yeah, I can see the middle one, so, concrete, so. They're kind of the one, too.
So, congratulations.
Well, we put them all because we thought those were all classified under recruiting.
Yeah, it's one of those things, especially in government, it's like,
They got to start from the end.
yeah,
Well, it
people
is.
like me, Colin, you don't get to choose when jobs open up, it's just, you wait. And from everything I read, their assistant, he left on good terms, he was 35, so he was just ready to go take on the city, and he went to Manistee. So,
Well, and for you, it's just a bigger city, bigger experience. That'll make you qualified.
You feel confident there's pretty good people there?
I think so. During the interview, it was one of those things, mayor, older guy, reminds me of Brian, he was just in the office. It was my last interview, it was like the panel, there was like 2 retired managers, some staff, and their city manager. The one head that's retired, and the mayor just had a meeting, so he just said that out.
I guess I'm thinking at it from like,
Make this work.
when I report back to the constituents, I think what I want, you have to balance that in.
Probably sometime mid-January. I don't have a start date yet, but I just knew, like, okay, give Colin like months out of, and no matter what, like, it'd be nice to have a week break until I can move and relax, but it's gonna be kind of when we start to move.
Done?
What other responsibility do you
Yeah.
have?
A lot of it's gonna be like internal people stuff, so. Hopefully not as much, hopefully not so much HR programming, but I think it's gonna be more really true. This is the city manager position where it's, before.
I was invited. No.
The big thing I'm gonna try to take is something that we did here, especially.
Okay.
It's gonna be big.
Streamline things.
They're coming in from Shanghai.
Just like meetings and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
See where Salt's got on the list?
I wonder who put that, threw that idea out. These gentlemen are done, Marilyn.
They're close. So if someone needs to report out.
Let it be a council member.
Council member report out.
Probably Dean, since Jack wasn't here at the last one.
And if there's anything missing, or something we haven't discussed, something that needs to go up there, they'll be asking questions, they may need something clarified, so report up what the thinking was, and then they have an opportunity to add to the list. And then I'll just write in what they say, make sure it's all.
Again, this is just the next 12 months, or next budget year, so that's why I want to look at. Because some of these items can be done, but they're not something that's going to be a priority. We've got priorities on other things.
So how would you like to handle it? They can be done, they probably will be done. Does that make it before, or does that make it for one, because they are going to be?
So like this,
That's the, yeah,
it's increased compost, doing our own composting, and then solar panels.
I think those are great things, but again, if our focus is core services, then core services is enhancing and delivering what you currently have, not offering.
and it just fits within our definition of it, so it can be deferred. So we can like, we can defer, we can defer.
Maybe one of those things that if we're doing planning, we might include it as part of the planning, but in this case,
Solar is probably easier because you can incorporate that into some existing.
well, like the composting, this will be dealt with when we go to renew our contract. We may not want to do, right,
Can we tell them 5 minutes?
I just saw what Milford,
Can we have that in 5 minutes?
they don't use waste management. They renewed theirs for 7 years. 7 years. It's just the cost of living increase.
guess from what Marilyn said is, you'll
Well, don't actually do these.
folks
You
do
already
have the
do.
ability to add something.
So calculate that out. So what's the DPW gonna
Like
do?
now, the sustainability, they have some
Well, we do, I mean, we do our lease, but I don't know what to do.
All right, make sure that you have someone ready to report out. Looks like,
We're all good?
Probably, oh,
You want to start with anybody in particular?
well, I think we should start with core services or end with core services.
Let's end with core services. So let's start with Dean. So here's the rotation. It's going to be Dean. I know that Jim is going to report out. Councilmember Del Orco is reporting out for infrastructure. I'd probably recommend Janet as the council member report out on community livability. So we'll go Dean, Janet, Jim, and then Dawn. Are you up for core municipal services?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. Well, just because we're recording this, let's use the microphone.
Thanks. All right, for sustainability and resilience, the goal is to embrace new opportunities and mitigate threats to the long-term viability of our community. So as we looked at there's a number of things, basically two categories being green infrastructure and communication. So a number of the items that we felt that were, number one, essential, and the items are number 48, which is risk mitigation that addresses water, odor, and DEI. I think that's a major theme for most all of our categories. The other one is COVID recovery and living with COVID, and that is number 49, which also we have identified as number 2. It's the issue of the anxiety that's associated with COVID and so forth. We know it's part of the problem, but it's also dealing with this one, so understanding that it's the idea of how do we work forward is this COVID environment that we're working in. The other ones, smart meters. As we've already been talking about it and have it on our agenda, that's one of the things that should be is the category of desirable. We know that we were looking at that and an idea that potentially would be something we want to accomplish in the next year. Again, I mentioned that anxiety related with COVID. Everybody's upset. They get excited when something doesn't work, and we get in trouble for that. And then number 50 is diverse and varied forms to reach all citizens. Part of the communication thing is, again, trying to make sure that we reach out and get to everyone in terms of however we communicate to them, making sure that all forms, both paper, social media, and everything are being done, I believe. And then we get down to the other items that we want to do, but may not be something that we can do immediately in the next year or so. And so down here, charging. We know about electrical stations. We have some in town, but we would probably encourage that more, and however that would be addressed. Rain barrels, that's encouraging. That's probably something that could be done. It's just something that it's desirable, but I don't know how exactly we're going to approach it. We would probably defer this to the Environmental Commission to come up with an idea and a plan. And then lastly, the two other items are solar panels, which could be addressed in a project or something we're designing, but right now it probably takes time to figure out how exactly we would do those all within a year, so it's a little farther out. And then a different way of composting, making a major composting center similar to like Ann Arbor has, and that would be something we could probably potentially address during discussion with Waste Management or when our contract comes up in the next couple of years.
So Marilyn, remind me now, council members or department heads could add something to this list, is that correct?
Yeah, the first thing is, are there any questions about anything that they have discussed or anything you need clarified? Right, then as a reminder, not only to those who are in the room, but those who are listening or watching, this is our third session. At the first session, we had discussions around the strategic areas. Then there was a citizen survey. We also had a citizen session. So this is where all these ideas have come from. So now, if there's anyone here, after listening to this, says, here's something else that I've thought of in the last few weeks since we've been with each other, this is missing. Is there anything in addition that needs to be in 1, 2, 3, or 4 in sustainability and resilience? That seems to cover everything? All right, then we'll move to, thank you very much. We'll move to community livability.
Okay, ours was pretty split among the categories for the most part. We started with, in our essential priority ones, we have a couple of things like numbers 37 and 38, which were the dog parks and the pickleball courts. Those have been on the radar for a long time. Those are fully funded projects that just need to be done and completed. So we listed them as a priority one because they've just been a carryover project for a couple of years now. 39 was better use of 411. We definitely feel this relates back to what Mr. Gearbaugh was saying, which is communication. It's essential that we've got to get a means of getting in touch with all of our residents, especially in emergency situations. 40 is evaluate the convenience of location of handicapped parking spaces. We weren't sure where to place that one. I think that we put it as a 1 because I do think it needs to be a priority for our city, that we just need to take a look at how we've developed around our parking lots and make sure if the layout is still the best use. During COVID, we moved some spaces to accommodate curbside service and such, and there was a great use of those spaces by handicapped people because they were right in front of businesses. And so maybe looking at some of that would be a really easy fix that really hopefully wouldn't be very expensive to do. 41 was complete the wayfinding signage, and that goes back to the first point. That's something that's been on the books for a while. I believe that is a fully funded project. It just needs to be completed. Going down into priority 2, which is desirable, we had put connectivity of our sidewalks. That's been a goal of the city for a long time. I know that our new DPW director is working on an all-encompassing plan. So we're hoping that we can kind of move that along in the next year so that the following year it can be a 1. 25, which was diverse housing, and it was evaluate current policy, future impact, and zoning. We were able to label this as a 2 because we didn't feel as though it needed a funding source at this point. It just needs to have a plan. And so I do think that's been a priority of the city for a while. So as we continue to grow and look at annexing other properties, having a plan in place would definitely be, I think, advantageous. 26 was increase access to healthcare opportunities. We view that definitely as desirable. We didn't feel as though we could make that a 1 because some of it is out of our control. I mean, it's a third party bringing them into the area. I mean, so we can definitely work our side of that in hopefully, once again, it can step up to a 1 in the future. 36 was provide lighting to connect the parks for safety. And we did feel as though that was an important measure in our community. There are a couple of parks and pathways that have been earmarked for lighting. And so we felt that that was not only desirable, but obtainable. Going into 3, which is acceptable, we have a couple on our list that sort of got lumped together. I'll start with connecting the parks. That's currently a part of our master plan, and it's definitely desirable to get it done. I think it's just going to take a little while for it to climb the ladder to get to where it has to be as a 1. 28 was expanding the old railroad tracks beyond those, and it's also, again, for connectivity. So we felt those sort of tagged together. 29 was, there were citizen comments about creating, cleaning up the rivers, creating a kayak launch, and so 29 to like 35, basically all tied in together. And I think it's definitely something we need to have on our radar, and hopefully start working a plan so it can also work through. The only one that we put as deferrable in a priority 4 was updating the key bank map. And so that's definitely a want, not a need at this point. And that's where our list finishes off.
Would you one more time
Oh,
read what you wrote out?
yes, I apologize. We did add one thing to our list, and it's and we did list it as an essential, which is having gates installed at both Curtis and Millpond Park at the entrances. There's been a couple issues that have come up about it. Safety first and foremost. Whenever there's a weather event, Curtis Park has to be closed. It currently requires DPW and police to do that, whereas if there were a gate there, it would just require one person go, close the gate, and boom, it's done. Same with Millpond Park. Millpond did have gates at one point. I think that they were removed, or if they are there, they are not utilized any longer. And that's been an ongoing issue through the Parks Commission also. That comes up monthly. There is some activity that happens in Curtis Park after hours, and by closing that park off at the entrance, it would also help to alleviate some of those issues.
Before you have any additions, are there any questions or comments for community livability? Yes.
When you're mentioning extending the, the trail to connect Colony Park or connecting Curtis, what about the connection that we tried to apply for a grant which would connect Millpond up through the river past the water facility? That would be something that Carla probably has a little bit more information on. It's the one that we had applied for about a year ago or 2 years ago, and it was turned down.
Yes.
That one, that would be the other one that I didn't know if that clarifies underneath the,
No, we did discuss that also.
okay.
And could you just bring that to the board so in the appropriate place so that it's captured on our report?
Yep, I will make sure to add it once I find the marker. So.
Okay, then
You
okay.
can pass that off to Jim, Janet. And Jim, you'll pass it off to Dawn.
All right, so infrastructure is a hot topic in the community right now. The goal here is to maintain our critical infrastructure and manage a quality public utility system. This category describes action items within water, wastewater, and streets. These action items are generally geared toward provision and maintenance of public utilities. So one area where we felt there was a bit of redundancy will be 14 and 20. This is roads, sanitary, and water are all in poor shape. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say all, but there's some that are in poor shape. The inventory, we need to evaluate current state and create realistic plan to productivity and address improvements. And 20 pretty much elaborates the same idea, whereas we need to have an inventory to evaluate current state of roadways and create a realistic plan to productively address improvements. That's something that affects all of our residents, so we want to make sure we put an emphasis on that. 15 deals with the water treatment plant. We have a plan to continue to evaluate current policies and procedures to improve with an eye toward the future. Water quality has been an issue that has received a lot of attention in the last year and a half or so, and we're aggressively pursuing all opportunities we have to make strides in that direction. Excuse me. Item number 19, delaminating digester. Evaluate internal and external deterioration. So this is an issue that affects air quality, odor. We really need to try to understand what's happening there so we can fully address complaints that residents are levying, that we're suffering from continuing problems with odor complaints there. The digester is a critical component of that. It's going to take some time. I don't know if this is something that we can address in 18 months after talking to our superintendent at wastewater treatment plant, but it's something that definitely falls under the category of essential. Item number 18, identify trouble spots in water flush, water treatment, and distribution. This goes back to water quality, the brown water issues we've been having. Probably not a simple fix. We've been chasing down everything we can think of to look into this. The hydrant flushing was our first pass at hoping to address this issue, and I think we're learning now that there are additional measures that need to be taken, and that certainly falls under essential, and we're taking that very seriously. So down to category number 2. This item number 16 is communicate long-term solutions. Residents want to see a prioritized plan. This is certainly something that we're working on, and communication, as has been referenced earlier, is of high importance. Air quality, number 17. Current system does not address the odor. Continue to search for solutions, and that ties into some things that we mentioned as essential. And in category number 1, the digester is the first thing we want to tackle, and then we'll move on to the other items subsequent to that. Moving on to category 3, continue to patch, repair, and stripe. Yes, this is desirable. This is certainly something that we want to look into. I personally feel in this community that the roads are in pretty good shape as far as patching goes, and striping is something we want to take care of, but not as high priority as some of the other items. And then deferrable, we're looking at signage, use of new communication technology, sensors. We put this as deferrable because this is not something we have a lot of control over. This is more ruled by the private sector, and as technology advances and as we stayed connected to these ideas, we'll certainly implement those technologies as they become available. 23, concentrate on feeder routes coming into town from all directions. The roads that are probably in the best shape are the major thoroughfares, the major arteries, all points, north, south, east, and west. MDOT maintains control over Michigan Avenue. We have little authority there. We just, there was a lot of work that the Washtenaw County Road Commission did on Ann Arbor Milan Road heading south out of town. These are probably the arteries that are in the best shape, so that's why they fall under the deferrable category. And that's where we left off. And Don.
Questions or comments about what is currently up on the infrastructure? Janet?
So the only one that I had a comment on was on number 21, we talked about striping. And I know that we keep talking about striping as a traffic calming measure, and especially in some key spots. So, I would like to see it at least as a 2. I mean, it's something that we've talked about now since the Michigan Avenue Road project in some areas. We've talked about it now on Monroe Street with the new sidewalk. So I feel like it should be higher than the 3. I mean, just my personal opinion. I think that striping has a lot of value.
Okay.
We've seen that on other streets.
Exclusively for the traffic calming aspect, or do you feel that it has other merits?
I'm sure there's other merits, but we initially had done striping for parking as well as for traffic calming.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. I would bump it up.
Okay.
We talked about that for long enough. It's not that difficult in the grand scheme of things to achieve. And to Jan's point, it's not only traffic calming, but from a parking management perspective, you're going to tend to create more parking spots when you actually delineate where is a parking spot as opposed to having it be a free for all.
Fair enough. Okay. Any,
Jumping on that too, I believe we've already started proposing, or they've been developing RFI or RFP for striping to adjust the stuff on Henry Street and all of that. And I agree, I'm also concerned that we have a number of intersections where there is no striping any longer, and the stop lines are gone. And I know we are fixing some streets and we do striping when we do the new streets, but it's clear that we have concerns that people don't know where to stop in intersections. So I agree with the trying to do that.
And I would say not just a lot of it is crosswalks too. I think there's a deficiency with the crosswalk. Crosswalk lines are gone in certain sections.
Okay.
In areas where there's pretty heavy pedestrian
Yes.
I agree with that being up at a number or two, so at least fixing our potholes.
Okay, any other input or feedback? I hazard a guess that both the city engineer and DPW director agree with moving 21 into a higher priority, and I feel like maybe I've come out of this relatively unscathed if I only had to remove one item. So, all right, now it's your turn.
Any other responses to what was just said about this?
About 21, we miss a lot of our stop bars and crosswalks, for sure. And we did not strike last year. So it's actually in a package and we'll have it done.
I cannot get more wrong than he did. So, all right. So our group, we were in charge of core municipal services, and as a reminder, this category is the action items that supports all of these others. So all of these, the items on these are important, but they couldn't get done without obviously staff and putting the people in the right jobs and giving them the resources that they need. So that's what we were focused on. At number 1, the staff recruitment and retention and succession planning, that was the number 1 if we had to even do a number 1. So that was absolutely put up top. Initially on first pass, we the first 4, 1 through 4, we kind of lumped together under staff and openings and retaining staff, but then we kind of drilled it down a little bit, even within the 1 through 4. So, which we can talk about later. 6, planning and development again, with succession planning. We've got to start looking, more out into the future, what's coming down the lane there. 3, I forgot 3. So under 3, we had rec center and police department. We couldn't quite recall what we talked about with rec center specifically, I think. But we wanted to make a note that we're putting 3 up at number 1 for the police department only right now.
Can anyone remember more details about that?
I can suggest that I think the issue with rec center is being able to get lifeguards and just general staff they're struggling. All rec centers are in the area that just can't get those type of
Yeah.
staffing. So we
And it proves particularly detrimental to us during this key time because when we don't have desk supervision or we don't have lifeguards, then we have to shut down or limit the amenities that we offer on any given day. So if we're struggling to get members, then not having the pool area open for 4 hours is very detrimental.
That makes sense, but I don't recall at all talking about that in our group before. So that's why we didn't. Certainly it can go back up there if it needs to. So I just...
What do you have it at now, Dawn?
We put that, let's see, where did we put the rec center? We put that down under acceptable, but I think that we translated that wrong. We were talking more about the importance of the rec center, and we don't, if you don't have staff, we don't need to give the rec center more money, and that might not have been what this was designed for, so.
I don't know, from a rec center sustainability perspective, Dean, what would you say it's at 3 now? Would you move it to 2?
I'll go with what you all recommended, leave it at a 3.
You sure? Okay. Okay, so let's see here. 7, recycling and trash. We all know people want their stuff picked up. Brian has said it a million times. We must maintain that. Let's see here. 8, continue to ensure public safety, fire, police. Chief Hart obviously has done a lot of great things, and we want to keep that up at the top of our lists. Let's see here. 10, communications. My colleagues have already said communication has been an issue, so just reiterate that. 13, cybersecurity. I think with cybersecurity right now and everything that we do being on the internet, especially like even Larry's talking about meters that send things over, we need to make sure that we're protected more than ever. 4, I don't know how I went out of order here, but 4, the current work environment, what attracts and retains our staff. Working at U of M, when we hire and fire, it costs us more time and money. So I've seen firsthand, you got to keep the people, make sure that we're treating them right, and what are we doing right that keeps people, and what are we doing wrong that makes people want to leave. So that should be pretty high. Desirable, number 2. That's where we talked about staff openings, and Mickey Joe made a good point. If it's an essential staff opening, with Mike getting ready to leave us, that would obviously have to be refilled
right away. But until we have the proper people in the right spots with the benefits and pay that's comparable, only then should we start looking at maybe positions that aren't as, I don't want to use the word important because that's not accurate. Everybody's important, but there are also spots we need filled for day-to-day operations more than others. So that's why we put that down here. Acceptable, 5, business recruitment and expansion, jobs creation. Anybody remember why we put, where we put that? I don't.
A lot of that's out of our control.
That's all right. Yep. So, yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily have the first say on all of that, what's coming into town. 11 was the Wi-Fi. We have Wi-Fi problems in Saline, but I think we all decided that it was not, if you look at the definitions that you gave us, 3, worthwhile projects to be considered if funding is available. These are projects that are adequately planned but not absolutely required. So going just by the definition, that's why we put that down here. Talked about the rec center already, and thanks, Dean, for that information you added on. And then deferrable. So we're going to go with air quality because that's going to automatically adjust as our infrastructure, like what Jim was talking about, gets where it needs to be. And then 12, traffic enforcement. So Chief Hartz, he stressed that they are about educating right now, and it's not his, I don't want to speak incorrectly, but it's not your paradigm in your world where we're out giving a lot of tickets and doing a lot of enforcing. So just maintaining education.
Yeah, I leave it up to the officers who are making contact on the traffic stops. They feel that they can get, a message across traffic safety, and they can do that with a warning, then certainly that is their prerogative. Where if they feel that a ticket needs to be issued, then they will issue a ticket.
Yes, and
We are starting to see our numbers, traffic stops coming up, but we could probably all say, even driving here tonight, you saw someone doing something they shouldn't have been driving down the road. So
Larry's outing people. I saw that, Larry. Anyways, so that is what we ended up with. Does anybody have any comments or questions, Brian?
I got 2, Dawn, and maybe you can fill me in on the deferrable air quality. That came up from a citizen or via survey?
So weirdly enough, good question. Bill Beardsley was actually here, and he gave a lot of great input. He was one of our citizens who came and gave a lot of comments in our group, and he was definitely wanting to keep that on the radar very strongly, so that's why we incorporated it.
So what, if I may, what Bill may be referring to, because I think this was talked about several years ago now at the Code Review Task Force, which is now transitioned into a committee, was the evaluation and adoption of a clean air ordinance, similar to what other municipalities have. So to both review that and then subsequently to draft an ordinance and then to have council approve it wouldn't take a significant amount of resources. That, I mean, if that was desirable to this group and to staff, that could easily be bumped up into one of the higher categories.
I honestly don't recall it trending towards that, what you said. Do you correct me if I'm wrong, team? It was more just air quality, and with smell, with the odor, and obviously that's what I
think it was more infrastructure like Jim had talked about, and also communication system over here with Municipal and one.
right. So I mean, I don't.
So maybe 2 different things.
Yeah, it might be.
Anything
Anything
my
else?
other comment was, I think you have it under 3, which is business attraction and retention, and I agree that to a certain extent that is influenced by market conditions. And I guess I'd be amenable to leaving that where it is for this particular year, since the focus is on core municipal services. But I just want to state for the record, again, this is my bias and the thing I'm particularly passionate about. I think in the ensuing years, we would want to see that
Okay.
rise to a higher level.
I think that we talked about that and agree with that. It's just when you say back to basics, you have to figure out what basics is. So we would agree, though, yeah. So anybody else? Kevin?
So for the, under number 2, filling all staff openings, explore effective incentives to retain staff. I have a strong lean to number 1 on that, because our people, our staff, are
So we agree, and number 1 also says retention. So we already covered that in number 1. I think 1 through 4 on our core municipal services were a kind of a big Venn diagram. And so we took them all apart and literally treated them as their own. So number 1 says staff recruitment and retention. So I think, yes, we agree with you. I don't know why it says retain staff on 2 because it also says it on 1. So maybe, I think number 2, actually, the explore effective incentives should just be taken out of there because we have retention in number 1 and number 2 addresses staff openings. They're kind of 2 different things.
So do you just want to take one off, or do you want?
Well, we did it by doing this, so number 1 has retention in it. Number 2, if we treat that as just fill all staff openings and stop and scratch out this second part, it's fine.
Okay, why don't you then combine, is it good to combine 1 and 2?
That's what we did.
No, that's what we don't want to do. Yeah,
So would you be in favor of scratch out, because I'm going to copy?
sure.
Just scratch that out, just like that, because it's repetitive on number 1.
Thanks, Mickey Joe. What's that, Jack?
Before we start striking things out, let me say something.
Uh-huh.
Please, second part of that, explore effective incentives to retain staff. I think we gave up some things during the immediate years past, in terms of benefits and so on, or attractive in terms of incentives to retain people. And I think as it's possible to get back to some of those things, it might be desirable to do that as a means of providing a further incentive to keep people.
Absolutely, and I think we're all saying the same thing. We're just not focusing that it's listed twice on here. So if we could change 1 to read staff recruitment and explore effective incentives to retain staff, we're you know what I mean? Because you're right. That's what we meant. It's just retention was addressed in 2 separate bullet points, and we don't need to quantify it in 2 separate ways. So yeah. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
And I think number 12 could be collapsed under number 8.
12 and 8, traffic enforcement. Yeah, it could. I don't know why it was a separate bullet point, but that all has to do with, oh. Give me a separate bullet point and then tell me to scooch it up in there. I see what you.
12 and 8 are fine.
Anybody else? Yeah, Janet?
So number 11, which talks about the city Wi-Fi, I'd love for there to be an opportunity to bump that up. I do think it's imperative that we have optimal Wi-Fi in this community. Now that, it makes our community desirable. People work from home. Kids are still doing online school. We need to have a city that has a Wi-Fi system that is accessible to everyone.
I'm good with that, team.
How much of that is a state function, how much is of a private?
Well, I think it's who we're contracting with, right? Like who we ask to come into the city. So we don't have all the control over it, but certainly we can court and or converse with, internet providing companies that are maybe more stable sometimes than the ones we have. So we don't have all the control, but we have some, I guess.
And there are examples of municipalities getting into that business. Not suggesting we should, but there are examples of providing Wi-Fi, especially in limited geographic areas, or doing it for areas of commerce or within business parks.
There are municipalities that perceive a Wi-Fi or broadband as a public utility.
Yeah, and I think 3 is a good category because the way it defines it, worthwhile project to be considered if funding is available. One of the big things is even the push for small cell type technology. So if we have the money and the time to do that in the next year, it's something to start considering for the next.
So I guess we need a vote.
Electric service too. Some communities run their own electric service. Lansing, power.
Well, you may have seen, Ann Arbor so discussed it with their level of service or DTE, they've spearheaded an initiative to start looking at providing their own power.
Well, considering the county is doing a big rural push, it might be something that we can look to see what they're doing if it's going to mean, it's supposedly not going to trust the cities, but somehow I think it's going to get overlapped.
That's why I mentioned, we talked about that in our group. That's kind of why we put it down a little bit, because we know the county and Shannon Beeman's been rolling this out, and has been a strong advocate. So that's kind of why we bumped it down, but I'm happy to move it up if that is the consensus.
Based on the title of the categories, if we think it's acceptable, then it belongs in acceptable. If it's desirable to improve it, then maybe we should bump it up.
So let's revisit the definitions. Acceptable would be worthwhile projects to be considered if funding is available. These are projects that are planned but not absolutely required. But like Janet was saying, hello. So
Remember, it's a one-year period too, so even the county can't get it all pushed out.
that's true. But then desirable will be high priority projects. This includes projects that would benefit the community and projects whose validity of planning and validity of timing have been established and are appropriate for a progressive community to pursue. I guess it does fit in that too. I don't know. Okay, all in favor for 2? Desirable, come on. 3? 3 wins, okay. Not wins, I'm sorry. Just enough competitiveness in me to, here, you know what we'll do? Thank you. Oh, sorry, Larry.
Just type Jim now.
What oh!
Okay, remembering that the commitment was made at the first session to have a very strong focus on the core municipal services. Have we missed something? Is everything covered there?
If it's not covered there, then it would be covered under infrastructure, in my judgment.
Okay?
Can we just reiterate, when you talk about risk mitigation, is that an action plan?
That is part of the action plan, is to mitigate the concerns that we have with water and sewer and those issues. So essential services, I don't see where we're actually saying water and sewer. What's that listed in here? This list?
Well, that was the problem, but under infrastructure, see, to me, when I think core services, I think clear water, right? But we talked about this last meeting. That's not what core services in this context was meant. This is the staffing behind getting all of these other things we want,
So infrastructure is more the product versus
Yeah.
this is more the service aspect that we're talking about.
Right, because it seemed odd to me too, but,
So it helps clarify that.
yeah.
I agree, Don, that's good.
Maybe we should put that keep that up there as far as service versus end product.
Well, it's in here, it's in the.
I thought what we had talked about is, in theory, you could insert infrastructure as a subsection of core municipal services. But because infrastructure is so vital, because the majority of complaints and inquiries we receive from businesses and residents of late are directly related to infrastructure, we thought we would separate it and make it its own category.
Perhaps we should move air quality over to sustainability, which kind of ties in with the environmental issues. I don't know if that's a.
It could also have gone with infrastructure because it would go along with once the water treatment plant is, up where it should be, then that will automatically have.
I think the air quality expands on because of the issue we talked about, what Brian was saying, clean ordinance, it's the smoking in public and that type of thing, which secondhand smoke, those kind of.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, it could almost get dumped into my group then too. I mean, because if you're talking about it with regard to the way that Brian described it, which is something that we have talked about before, which is a clean air ordinance, but no smoking, no vaping, that sort of thing.
No diesel trucks.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's sort of a quality of life aspect.
But I also think,
Get into interstate commerce.
yeah, and I also think Bill touched on when you have heavy industry, which we have some heavy industry, that also has an impact on air quality. So there's a number of different facets to that particular issue, but it does probably make sense to relocate it to yeah.
To
I would go
sustainability?
to D's.
Yes.
You could do Janet's as well. but-
I don't think that was by this group, I think that was from our prior meetings, I don't think that counts against your score.
Thanks, Nikki Jo. That's
We are really in a competitive mode here tonight, aren't we? I got to make sure I'm right.
Look, you can have fun while you're doing work, right?
For sure, for sure. All right. Anything else around the plan, the priorities for the next 18 months?
The only thing, we talked about all the concerns that we've been hearing lately, so we need to be sure we address that. So water and sewer, the order at the plant, our roads, so I feel like we did them.
We did.
Well, and also a component of that is how are we communicating and how are we engaging with our citizens? So it's effectively using the 411, effectively using social media. It's launching this new app that will allow citizens to report complaints when the website is relaunched in the next couple weeks.
Okay. So next steps are, I gather all this information, I put it in a document form in the order in which you have defined, and then I send it to Mayor Morrow, City Manager O'Toole, and Clerk Royal. They look them over, and I know you've taken notes, I've taken notes, I think to fill in some blanks where we may need more detail, so we remember what we're talking about 6 months from now, will be really helpful. And then the next steps after that, once that document is correct and accurate, the next steps are?
That document will be brought before City Council, probably first as a discussion item, towards the tail end of a regular meeting agenda for folks to review to make sure it appropriately reflects our 3 sessions and the consensus that was developed. It will then come back at a subsequent council meeting for adoption, and I think our goal would be to do that sometime in the next probably, I would say 60 days. 60 to 90 days, 90 days max, likely to be closer to 60.
And that way you are quite prepared for the alignment with budget.
Correct. The goal would be to have this document reviewed and adopted by council as quickly as possible, so it can be integrated as part of the 2022-2023 budget process.
All right.
I have 2 questions. One was, is there any mention of municipal buildings, like all of our facilities, in any of these? I don't think we talked about that. And
That's right, yeah, the municipal, the plan that you just finished up, we assessed all our buildings and everything, so
right.
that somehow should be adopted into infrastructure as part of next year.
Well, I think the reason for that was because we were looking at core services and things that we could tackle reasonably within 18 months. I don't know if major changes to buildings would fit in that category, but
So we're putting new roofs on the depot, possibly this building. Because
I think the goal, the way it's worded, Jim, could be a little bit more modest. And we need to start setting some money aside to start doing some rehab and updates to various buildings and structures in the city of Saline. Even this, which is it's a gorgeous facility, but it's 20 years old. I mean, it's starting to show its age in certain ways, and it needs to be updated.
So where would that fall?
Where are we going to put that? Just write it right in there.
Put under 2.
Rehab and updates.
Building or facilities assessment plan that we had.
Well, we have the plan,
It's begin implementation.
implementing the plan, yeah.
Because their dollar amounts and everything are in there, we just have to identify what to do with the next year.
Good catch, Janet.
So, Marilyn, my other question was, and has anybody from staff looked at our old plans? Is there anything that was a carryover? There's projects that were ongoing or anything that we identified previously that should still get incorporated? We did that at the first meeting. But did we actually, like, has anybody even looked at these things? I can't read this on, I apologize, because I can't see that small of print.
They're small.
From
The
them?
print is small.
One of my questions was to be, if all of our new staff and everything, have you identified anything that we're missing and not talking about?
Yes.
Communication is key, in recording and record keeping, or we can't do this by braille. Gotta be able to see it.
So it's adopting those institutional systems and data collection.
How our cities-
So you have that identified in the.
Yeah,
It falls under succession planning as well.
You and I chatted about that today in reference to some
important for us to come in to not have anything written down and not understand historically what has taken place. That's a challenge. So think of when Gary retired, and I know he's coming around more, but I just feel we could do a better job of sharing that knowledge and passing it on to the next administration so they could, effectively manage their different departments.
So would you throw that up under core municipal services?
I would throw it under part of the succession planning
Yeah.
and policy and procedures.
Okay. Well, it's documentation of responsibility, knowledge.
Institutional knowledge, yeah. The only thing we might have missed is transportation in terms of our bus service. Really don't think of that. It's not achieving what it needs to, and missing, so it'd be
Or-
community livability.
Yeah, it could be, we think you could do it, community livability is fine, I was gonna say, you do other infrastructure too, but transit, if we're saying transit, probably.
Transit would be the best question.
Right. And where would you like it ranked?
Probably not one, but not, like, I'd say 2 or 3.
Okay. We'll put it in, we'll be optimistic.
But we do know that people movers come, or people is coming up, so People's Express.
People, that'd be cool for facility.
Okay, Janet, I think you've written down there transportation, is that correct?
Yes.
Can we say something more so that you will know what you meant
Okay.
months from now?
Well, it's really improving transit services.
Okay.
Put AATA, put People's Express alternatives.
Myself a note, right. Think we've covered everything?
I'm sorry, if I missed this, did we get affordability anywhere specific to housing?
We did on that.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed it.
Okay, because you are consistently incredible at focusing and conversing, I wanted to make sure that you spent all your time doing that and not writing. So I hope this helped. Because your conversations, once again, as always, were very rich. So unless there is more that we have to say, I think you have completed your work for the next, at least this part of your work, for the next 12 to 18 months. Is that correct?
I think it is.
All right.
I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you for helping facilitate. We appreciate it very much. So,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Great pleasure working with you again. And I think the only real deficiency with this process is next year we will look at probably a more appropriate strategic time to host that public open house and really make a concerted effort to get the word out, especially amongst our boards and commissions and maybe our HOAs and neighborhood associations, because I think having a robust turnout and engaging one-on-one with the people we represent would be the key deficiency that would enrich this
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, 2 years ago, we had quite a number of people, which made for a completely different set of conversations and concerns and issues that were raised. So you're going to have to ask yourself, what did we do differently? I think you fed them when they knew they were going to get fed. But I think part of it is, I think part of it was COVID, and part of it was you've done a really good job with the survey. So if there are some people that say, I am able to take the survey and then not leave my home in the evening during this particular time, maybe I'll do that. But I think it's a really good idea next year to ask yourselves, what can we do ahead of time to ensure that you have a larger turnout than we did this year? Because the first 2 years ago, we had,
I've got an ambitious goal. I think for this community with an engaged citizenry and a lot of key priorities that are going to be either worked on, accomplished, or on the horizon for the next 2 years, I'd like to see 100 people show up at a public engagement assessment.
all right. That will be one of our focuses next year. And in the meantime, whatever you celebrate between now and the end of the year or following and throughout January, happy to everyone. Be safe and take care. All right. Thank you.